Hi, and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around, we're talking about spy films. In particular, the newest, and some say, though I disagree with this, the best of the Mission Impossible movies. Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning, starring that short guy, what's his name, Tom Cruise, and a whole bunch of people who are just there basically to boost Tom Cruise. Then I'm going to compare and contrast it to a spy movie from 10 years ago, which for my money is much better and much cooler and much more entertaining and above all shorter, and that is the Guy Ritchie remake of The Man from U.n.c.l.E. from 2015. I'm going to compare and contrast the two, but first off I'm going to talk about Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning. Mission Impossible is based on an almost 60-year-old TV series, the original Mission Impossible, which had Stephen Hill playing the boss of the Impossible Mission Force, Dan Briggs. Later on, Peter Graves came along playing Jim Phelps. After a 1980s reboot of the TV series in 1996, Brian De Palma made the first Mission Impossible film with Tom Cruise playing Ethan Hunt, a young and somewhat inexperienced IMF agent whose whole team gets killed and he has to solve the problem. Since then, we've had 7 more movies, including this one, all of which in each movie escalates the ubermensch reputation of Ethan Hunt. And that in itself is part of the problem with this movie. It's a second part of a 2-part movie in a sense, because the previous movie from 2023, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, and there is no Dead Reckoning Part 2, it's the Final Reckoning for the new one, introduced us to the science fiction concept that's at the center of the plot. An malignant AI called the Entity, which is controlling a whole bunch of people, is trying to take over the world, wants to control all the nuclear weapons in the world so that it can launch them all, destroy the human race, and live in a bunker for 1,000 years for no good reason apart from plot convenience. So in this second one, we've got Tom Cruise as Ethan Hunt and his team trying to get to a hard drive which has the original source code of the Entity, which is in a Russian submarine which was sunk by the Entity in the Bering Straits and lies 300 feet below the surface of the ocean. A little difficult to get to. They also have an extra weapon against the Entity, which is basically a fat thumb drive, created by Luther, the character played by Ving Rhames of the IMF team. And Ving Rhames is the only other guy that's been in all the Mission Impossible films apart from Tom Cruise. He has a device which will help them trap the Entity in a storage device that they have, so that the Entity can't ever get out, and they can save the world from it if they can convince the Entity to go into a server to which this drive is attached, upload itself into the hard drive, and they can quickly grab it and trap it in there like a genie in a bottle. And that's the analogy they use in the film. So everything in the world's at stake. The President of the United States, played by Angela Bassett, has to decide whether to launch nuclear weapons against all the other places where the Entity has taken over the nuclear arsenal. Every other nuclear power in the world. Pakistan, India, Israel, US, UK, France, USSR, China. I think that's them all. So there's too many countries that have got nukes anyway, as we all know. But the US government doesn't want Ethan to do this because they want to control the Entity. And that way they control all the nukes in the world and they can all live happily ever after, so they think. So the IMF team and Ethan are running around the world doing stuff which mostly is there to enable Tom Cruise to do his own stunts. There's another bit, just like in one of the previous movies, of Tom Cruise hanging off an aeroplane, in this case a biplane, for no good reason apart from the fact it would look good and stunty. There's also underwater holding your breath stunt, where he's underwater for a long time holding his breath, going down to the submarine and coming back up again. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff, which is basically a macho flex by Tom Cruise to say Ethan Hunt is a Superman, and Tom Cruise, by doing all the stunts himself, is by implication a Superman. I can't help but think that part of this is the mythology that Scientologists have about themselves, particularly top-level Scientologists like Tom Cruise, who believe, because of all of the Xenu aliens in B-52's rubbish, that Scientology has a part of its mythology, is going to live to be 200 and is going to be smarter and more wonderful than anybody else in the world because he is a top-level Scientologist who's done all the training and is better than everybody else, even though You would never say that because it wouldn't play well in a modern social media era. But that's the implication there. It's slid in as part of the subtext of this movie, and you can't really avoid it if you look at it closely enough. So we get 62-year-old Tom Cruise doing a lot of the stunts himself. A lot of the other actors are doing as many of the stunts as they can. We have Hayley Atwell playing the new kind of love interest for Ethan Hunt. Though, like in every other Tom Cruise movie, there's absolutely zero chemistry between Hayley Atwell and Tom Cruise. He doesn't have the ability to have any kind of real romantic chemistry with anybody else because he's Tom Cruise. He's in love with himself. I'm not going to go into the possibility of him having a sexuality that's not heteronormative. It's not my business and I don't particularly care. But as far as him doing his job as an actor, that chemistry is never there with any other actors he plays with, except a little bit with some male actors. We also get Benji, played by Simon Pegg, and Simon Pegg knows which side his bread is buttered on. Let's be honest about that. And so he plays the role of the tech guy, along with Lucer, played by Ving Rhames, who knows what to do, and he's more the field tech guy these days, who can run around, can shoot a gun, and also does a lot of the techie stuff. So Tom Cruise is free to just run around. I mean, I've got a cognitive dissonance about the Mission Impossible movies, in that I like the movies themselves, and I like the dynamism of them, and I like the special effects, but I don't like Tom Cruise. That leaves me in a weird place in my head as far as these movies are concerned. The supporting cast is interesting. We've got S.A. Morales playing Gabriel, the bad guy, a name which is probably pinched from the first Modesty Blaise novel, to be honest, played in the movie by Dirk Bogarde. Having a villain called Gabriel is just like low-hanging fruit as far as naming is concerned. We also get Pom Klementiev playing Paris, a French-speaking female assassin who kicks ass and doesn't bother to take names. A lot of characters from previous movies, like Kittredge, played by Henry Cavill, who works for the American government. And they have some really interesting but off casting. They just cast for names in this movie for an odd reason. One of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is played by Nick Offerman, a guy called General Sidney, who has a couple of plot beats which are kind of interesting. It's the kind of role where you didn't necessarily need Nick Offerman. We've got Jenna McTeer playing Walters, another one of the president's assistants, and she doesn't get a lot to do there, but it's a check, I suppose. And she is a very fine actress. And we have Hannah Waddingham playing Admiral Neely, who runs an aircraft carrier, and that's kind of wild and counterintuitive casting as well. It is just that little bit weird. And I'm there for that part of it. I like that part of it. We have Tremel Tillman playing submarine commander, and Shea Wiggum's back as Briggs, the guy who is basically trying to capture Ethan Hunt. And Briggs has a secret identity himself, which is kind of not important at all, but it probably means that when inevitably they make more Mission Impossible films, his character is going to be part of them. And Mark Gatiss turns up as another one of the president's assistants. And Mark Gatiss, who's also turning up at Fantastic Four First Flight, is getting pretty good at playing Americans, even though he's very much and prototypically English. There's also a character called back to the first Mission Impossible film, which I liked, but just to kind of summarize on Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, it's, for me, a little bit like that Mummy movie that Tom Cruise did, where Tom Cruise and his self-image tilt the movie in a direction that's not necessarily the way the movie should go, and is not in the interest of making it a rock-solid entertainment. I think there's a little too much of looking at himself in the mirror with any Tom Cruise movie. And in the Mission Impossible films, Ethan Hunt has become an unbelievable and not particularly attractive character. There is a scene at the end where everybody says goodbye in Trafalgar Square, and it's singularly unengaging. And the big stunt sequences, Tom Cruise and S.I. Morales fighting on a couple of biplanes, and the underwater sequences were singularly unaffecting. Yeah, there's Tom Cruise with a harness that's digitally edited out of the video on this plane, clinging to a biplane, doing all of that kind of jazz. It doesn't add anything to the film to have Tom Cruise doing his own stunts. It draws attention away from the threat of the plot and the threat of the entity to just spend prolonged periods of the movie watching Tom Cruise do stunts. That is a negative as far as keeping the entertainment going and engaging an audience. You go, okay, there's Tom Cruise hanging on there. Why is it taking so long for him to get that thing off Ezra Morales and to get to the ground and save the world? And there's also a bit of a continuity error in those sequences where Gabriel, played by Ezra Morales, says he's the only person on the plane with a parachute. But Ethan Hunt then proves to not have one parachute, but have two parachutes, even though we don't see them on him when he's clinging to the side of the biplanes and all that kind of jazz. It's dishonest, hand-waving magic that makes this kind of movie quite a cynical exercise in a lot of ways. The movie gets a very high IMDb score, but that can be bought. I don't think it's a genuine reflection of how audiences saw the movie. I think there's a stage where if a movie star has total control over the films he's making, and Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie have that with the Mission Impossible franchise, and if they're the wrong kind of person, the self-regard of that actor tilts things in a very obvious and in a way that has diminishing returns for an audience. That's the problem I had with the Final Reckoning. And also there's a lot of digital stuff done to make Tom Cruise appear younger than he is. There are times when he has crow's feet at the corner of his eyes, and then when there's a close-up of him and another actor, they mysteriously disappear. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on in this film, which is to be expected, but is kind of obvious if you look at it. Then I compared it and contrasted it to a movie I rewatched today, Guy Ritchie's 2015 reboot of The Man from U.n.c.l.e., starring Henry Cavill, Armie Hammer, Alicia Vikander, and Hugh Grant, and Elizabeth Debicki. Yeah, we'll leave aside Armie Hammer's dietary preferences and his fantasies about cannibalism. I'm not going to kink shame anybody. He didn't kill anyone. He didn't roast them up. He just had fantasies about it. Kink shaming people isn't what this channel does. But for me, this is 10 times as entertaining and fun, and above all rewatchable, than The Final Reckoning, because it knows what kind of movie it is. It knows that the whole idea is to entertain the audience, and the egos of the stars and the creators of the film aren't important. The tongue's always in its cheek. It's self-depreciating. Yes, it's based on a 1960s spy TV series, just like Mission Impossible, but shit, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. There are just so many aspects to this that are like the 1960s Cold War era setting is perfect for this kind of movie. There's Henry Cavill going through a reconstruction of Checkpoint Charlie at the start. There's a banger of a soundtrack with so many fantastic needle drops. You get Roberta Flack and Solomon Burke and Luigi Tenco to do Luigi Tenco's Il Mio Regno, a song which is about having a safe place in my own home and my own castle. Really good needle drop 1960s Italian pop song. In the middle of a scene where a Nazi torturer accidentally is electrocuted to death. Now, they counterweigh silly stuff with serious stuff in a really interesting way. And it's a fantastic looking movie as well. The last two Mission Impossible films have terrific locations, but they don't look sumptuous in the way the locations in The Man from U.n.c.l.e. do. The Italian locations dressed up to look like 1960s. The German locations around Checkpoint Charlie and that, which were obviously filmed in Eastern Europe. And we've got Henry Cavill playing Napoleon Solo, and he knows what kind of character he's playing. He's much better than he was in that one Mission Impossible film. Armie Hammer's kind of okay playing Ilya Kuryakin as a hulking, damaged, and possibly mentally ill Russian agent. Alicia Vikander is charming and great as the third member of the crew. Hugh Grant playing Mr. Waverly is just a lot of fun. Hugh Grant is having such a good career over the last 10 years, playing character roles where he is self-knowing and self-depreciating in the best way. And we've got Elizabeth Debicki playing the main villain of the piece. And she always looks fantastic. She was great in Tenet. She's great in this. Really like her in both of those films. Rewatching this one today, there's the Cold War tension between East and West and between Solo and Kuryakin, where they have a kind of hateful bromance for most of the film. It's just a sumptuously fun action film. There are lots of scenes of stunt work and action, which plays behind the scenes of one of the characters just chilling. So you've got a boat chase in the background of Henry Cavill eating a sandwich in a truck. And we've got Ilya Kuryakin and Napoleon Solo discussing what to do with a Nazi torturer while the electric chair is hooked up to short circuits and burns him to death. Lots of those kind of playing against the stereotypes of showing all of the action and using those action beats to further the plot and further the progression of the characters. It's done incredibly well. There's a great bit at the title sequence right at the start, which gives you a little bit of a history lesson on the Cold War, post-World War II. You see Churchill, you see Stalin, you see headlines of various newspapers, you see little newsreel clips under the titles that catch people who maybe don't know their history up on the world this movie inhabits. Apart from anything else, the 1960s were the coolest decade to set a spy movie, bar none. It was a time of great social and technological and cultural change. And also it was a time of great artistic progress in music and art and fashion and society and also pharmacology. The pill came in the 60s. So women could be free of the possibility of getting pregnant every time they had sex. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff, and it all sits really well in The Man from U.n.c.l.e. I'm not happy that they didn't make more of these movies. It didn't do particularly well at the box office, which is a shame. I think it really had legs as a franchise, and it was clearly being set up to make a franchise of movies. But for whatever reason, that didn't happen. But if you compare and contrast that spy movie based on a 1960s TV series with The Final Reckoning, I think you'll find this one comes up better. The stunts aren't as showy as the ones in The Final Reckoning, and it's not the actors doing the stunts that do occur in the movie. But there's a lot more plotting, there's a lot more back and forth, there's a lot more twists and turns to the plot that keep you going while you're watching the film, and it doesn't have to stay as welcome. Mission Impossible movie is like almost 3 hours long, and you could have easily cut at least 45 minutes out of that without losing anything important. Movies are about storytelling. They're about entertaining an audience. They're not just there so that you can say, hey, look, there's a 62-year-old guy hung off the side of an airplane. That stuff doesn't really matter. What I want is a movie that entertains me and delights me and has a rewatchability as well. A movie like this, every couple of years you can rewatch it and have a great time with this film. I'm not sure you could say the same with The Final Reckoning or any of the last 3 or 4 Mission Impossible movies. That ego of a major movie star is an impediment to the long-term enjoyment of a film for me. Let me know what you think. Let me know whether you are okay with the Tom Cruise Mission Impossible films, even though they are basically just star vehicles these days. I have a real problem with Tom Cruise, and I'm not ashamed to say it. So that's what I got for you this time around. A compare and contrast between 2 1960s TV series-based movies. One a franchise, one that should have been a bloody franchise. And I came up with the one that only made 1 movie instead of 8 of them. 8 so far. There's going to be more Mission Impossible films. I'll bet you it's $3.25 about that. So thanks a lot for watching. The usual things, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, hit the notification bell. You can become a channel member, or you can become a patron at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. And you get a little bit of a bonus for that. And you also get my monthly Spotify playlist of groovy music. Next up, we've got the Wednesday video, and then we've got Science Fiction Saturday, where I'm looking at science fiction movies from Europe, but they're not from Western Europe. So until then, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Watch this movie instead of a Mission Impossible movie. And I'll catch you next time.